Major Heinz Bahr had shot down 16 P-51 Mustangs by November 1944, more than any other Luftwaffe pilot still breathing, but he had never truly understood what he was fighting until the morning he realized he couldn't catch one. The mathematics were simple, brutal, and absolute. When an American fighter traveling at 437 miles per hour decides to leave, and your Focke-Wulf 190 tops out at 408, you have exactly 45 seconds from visual contact to watch your enemy dissolve into a silver speck on the horizon. 45 seconds to fire, to maneuver, to do anything except understand that you've already lost. Speed wasn't supposed to decide air superiority. Altitude was king. Climb rate was gospel. The defender held every advantage: shorter supply lines, familiar terrain, the ability to choose when and where to commit. Yet somehow, impossibly, the Americans had built a fighter that could simply refuse to fight, and in refusing, had made the entire Luftwaffe irrelevant over its own country. Bahr's credentials read like propaganda: 220 aerial victories, Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, veteran of every front from Spain to the Eastern Front to the burning skies over the Reich. At 29, he was simultaneously ancient and obsolete. His FW-190D9, the Dornen, Germany's latest answer to everything the Allies could throw skyward, represented the pinnacle of piston-engine fighter design. It climbed like a homesick angel, rolled faster than anything in Allied inventory, and packed enough firepower to disintegrate a bomber with a 2-second burst. Intelligence assessments from Luftwaffe High Command were unambiguous. The FW-190D series outperformed every American fighter in rate of climb, roll rate, and diving acceleration. The doctrine was ironclad. Radar detected the bomber streams 70 miles out. Fighters scrambled, climbed to 25,000 feet, positioned themselves beneath the formations where belly turrets couldn't depress to fire. Attack from below, rake the bombers with 20 mm and 30 mm cannon fire, break away before the escorts could respond. The American P-51s were supposed to be worried about protecting their bombers, not hunting interceptors. Home field advantage. German engineering. Experienced pilots against American boys who'd been flying for 18 months. Bahr trusted this doctrine the way he trusted gravity. He had executed it 220 times successfully. The reports filtering through intelligence channels in October 1944 therefore struck him as the usual wartime exaggeration. American P-51D models, the latest variant with the bubble canopy, were supposedly achieving impossible speeds at altitude, outrunning German interceptors in level flight. The engineering staff at Rechlin Test Facility had reviewed the claims and filed them under propaganda. The numbers didn't work. The P-51D used the same Packard-built Merlin engine as the British Spitfire 9, which topped out at 408 miles per hour. The Americans had added weight, more fuel, more ammunition, heavier armament. Physics didn't negotiate. Heavier aircraft with the same engine meant slower performance, not faster. Veteran pilots reported something else, something the engineers couldn't explain: Mustangs that attacked once, then vanished. Not retreating, vanishing. Disappearing beyond visual range before German fighters could turn to engage. These reports were dismissed as combat stress, misidentification, the fog of war. Bahr had seen enough combat to know that pilots under fire saw all manner of impossible things. November 2, 1944, began as textbook. Radar contact at 1,132 hours. Massive formation, 300-plus heavy bombers inbound toward the Ruhr industrial complex, escorted by fighters at high altitude. Bahr led 22 FW-190s off the runway at Akmer, firewall throttles, climbing through the morning haze over Münster. The weather was crystalline, visibility unlimited, scattered clouds at 15,000 feet, wind from the west at 12 knots. Perfect intercept conditions. His pilots were good, survivors all, men who'd learned their trade when the Luftwaffe still had fuel for training. They climbed in loose formation, preserving energy, conserving ammunition for the moment when bomber bellies would fill their gun sights. At 18,000 feet, Barr could see them, the contrails first, then the dark specks of the bomber stream, still 12 miles distant. The formations were tight, professional, exactly as American doctrine prescribed. He counted quickly, B-17 flying fortresses, probably the 91st and 381st bomb groups based on their approach vector, stacked in combat boxes from 22,000 to 25,000 feet. His staffel continued climbing, passing through 20,000 feet, then 22,000. At 24,500 feet, Barr throttled back to conserve fuel and scanned for the escorts. Protocol said they'd be above and behind the bombers, tied to their charges, unable to pursue aggressively without leaving the heavies vulnerable. He found them at 26,000 feet, P-51 Mustangs, their bubble canopies catching the sunlight, 30 or more aircraft weaving gently above the bomber stream. They'd seen him. They had to have seen him. 22 German fighters climbing into attack position couldn't be missed. But they weren't diving to intercept. They were accelerating, rolling into shallow dives, not toward the German formation but perpendicular to it, building speed. Barr felt the first cold finger of wrongness touch his spine. This wasn't defensive maneuvering. This was something else. At 1,147 hours and 22 seconds, for P-51 split from the high cover and committed to a diving attack run that would intersect his formation in 12 seconds. Barr's brain automatically calculated angles, closure rates, firing solutions. Then he saw their speed. They weren't diving, they were falling like meteors wrapped in aluminum, their approach angle too steep, too fast, building velocity that should tear their wings off. The Mustangs weren't slowing for a dogfight. They were accelerating through it. The P-51 Mustang could achieve 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet in level flight, a figure Luftwaffe engineers had reviewed, tested against their own captured examples, and declared physically impossible for an aircraft of that weight and drag coefficient. Except it wasn't impossible. The Packard V1650-7 Merlin engine produced 1,490 horsepower at war emergency power, but the secret wasn't the engine, it was the wing. North American Aviation had wrapped that engine in a laminar flow airfoil, a wing design so smooth, so mathematically precise in its curvature that air molecules clung to its surface 30% longer than conventional wings, reducing drag to levels German aerodynamicists hadn't believed achievable in combat aircraft. When those Mustangs rolled into their attack dive from 26,000 feet, they weren't just falling, they were achieving compressibility speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, velocities where the aircraft began encountering the same shockwave effects that would later define supersonic flight. The Americans had discovered something the Luftwaffe's tactical doctrine couldn't counter. You didn't need to win the dogfight if you could simply choose whether one occurred. The mathematics of Barr's nightmare were elegantly simple. His FW-190D9 could reach 408 miles per hour at 21,000 feet, 426 miles per hour with emergency power that could be sustained for exactly 90 seconds before the BMW 801 engine began destroying itself through overheating. The P-51D's 437 miles per hour represented a 29 mile per hour advantage, 42 feet per second of separation that opened between the aircraft every moment they flew in the same direction. If a Mustang pilot executed an attack run and decided to disengage, Barr had between 3 and 4 seconds of effective deflection shooting while the American fighter was still within his gun's effective range of 600 meters. After that, the geometry became impossible. The American pulled away at 42 feet per second, and Barr's options collapsed to two equally futile choices: pursue at maximum power and watch his engine temperature redline while the gap continued opening, or break off and accept that he'd been reduced to irrelevance in his own airspace. What made the revelation devastating was its origin. The P-51 Mustang hadn't emerged from some secret German-style research program or military-industrial Kriegspiel. It had been designed by North American Aviation, a company that built training aircraft, in response to a British Purchasing Commission's request in 1940. The British had wanted Curtiss P-40 fighters but couldn't get delivery slots. North American's chief designer, James Dutch Kindleberger, had promised to deliver a better fighter in the same timeframe it would take to set up P-40 production. His team designed the NA-73X in 117 days using the same organizational approach furniture manufacturers used for production efficiency: modular construction, simplified tooling, part standardization. The wing that would doom the Luftwaffe came from NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, a civilian research agency that studied aerodynamics for commercial aviation. The engine was British, license-built by Packard Motors, a car company from Detroit. The Germans had known all of this. Their intelligence files on the P-51 were comprehensive. They dismissed the entire aircraft as an over-specialized escort fighter. Too much range, not enough maneuverability, a design that sacrificed dogfighting performance for the tactically irrelevant ability to fly to Berlin and back. The assessment wasn't wrong about the trade-offs. It was catastrophically wrong about what mattered. At 1,147 hours and 35 seconds, the first P-51 attack element tore through bars formation at a closing speed exceeding 600 miles per hour. The Americans weren't attempting to dogfight. They executed a single slashing gun pass, 6 Browning M2 machine guns per aircraft pouring armor-piercing incendiary rounds through the intercept point, then used their momentum to climb away before any German pilot could rotate his aircraft to respond. Feldwebel Klaus Mayadusch, flying Barr's left wing, took 6 hits across his engine cowling at 1,147 hours and 41 seconds. The BMW 801 disintegrated in a spray of superheated oil and metal fragments. Fire erupted from the cowling seams, bright orange against the November sky. Mayadusch jettisoned his canopy at 1,147 hours and 48 seconds and rolled inverted to bail out. Barr instinctively kicked rudder and dove toward the attacking Mustangs, firewall throttle, every neuron screaming to pursue and destroy. His airspeed indicator climbed 420, 430, 440 miles per hour in the dive. His cylinder head temperature gauge swung into the red. The P-51s were already 1,200 meters ahead and climbing, their silver fuselages catching sunlight as they converted speed back into altitude with an energy efficiency his aircraft couldn't match. At 1,147 hours and 58 seconds, Barr watched Mayadusch's parachute deploy, then immediately shred apart, damaged by debris from the engine explosion. The body fell 23,000 feet into a forest southeast of Münster. At 1,148 hours and 12 seconds, the same 4 Mustangs had repositioned and attacked again from the opposite vector, using the altitude they'd regained to build speed for another diving pass. They hit 2 more FW-190s, damaging both, killing Lieutenant Werner Girth when 20mm cannon shells, his own, cooked off by fire, detonated in his ammunition bay. The bomber formation continued unmolested toward the Ruhr, its box formations never even wavering. Barr's remaining fighters scattered, unable to press an attack on the bombers because doing so meant exposing themselves to Mustang attacks they couldn't counter. The realization arrived with the clarity of a proof in mathematics. The Americans weren't fighting them. They were dismissing them. The Luftwaffe had become irrelevant through pure physics. 29 miles per hour of irrelevance, 45 seconds at a time. Barr's combat report landed on the desk of Luftwaffe High Command at 1830 hours, November 2, 1944. The language was precise, clinical, damning. P-51D fighters demonstrated ability to engage and disengage at will. Pursuit resulted in engine overheat warnings at 87 seconds. Enemy aircraft opened range to 2,000 meters before interception became physically impossible. Recommend immediate tactical review. The response came within 48 hours, stamped with the seal of the Reich Air Ministry's Technical Evaluation Department. Pilot assessment contradicts established performance data. American P-51D maximum speed 408 miles per hour per captured aircraft testing. FW-190D9 maximum speed 426 miles per hour emergency power. Tactical advantage remains with defending forces. But the Reich Air Ministry's engineers hadn't flown against the silver ghosts that appeared, killed, and vanished. 3 days later, a captured P-51D was transported to Rechlin Test Facility and subjected to comprehensive performance trials. On November 8, test pilot Hans Fay achieved 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet in level flight, sustained for 4 minutes without engine stress. The engineering report, classified and distributed to exactly 17 people, included one sentence that shattered Luftwaffe doctrine. Previous assessments were based on early P-51B models. The D variant's performance exceeds our interceptor capabilities at all combat altitudes. The admission came too late. By November 1944, 800 P-51D Mustangs were operating over Germany. The Luftwaffe had perhaps 400 serviceable day fighters to meet them. The strategic impact cascaded through German defensive doctrine like a fault line fracturing. Intercepting bomber formations became tactically impossible when the escorts could simply execute hit-and-run attacks with impunity. German fighters attempting to ignore the P-51s and focus on bombers exposed themselves to slashing attacks from fighters they couldn't pursue. German fighters attempting to engage the escorts found themselves chasing aircraft that opened range at 42 feet per second, burning irreplaceable fuel while the bombers proceeded unmolested overhead. By December 1944, Luftwaffe day fighter losses had tripled while bomber intercept success rates halved. American bomber crews reported a phenomenon their intelligence officers initially dismissed. German fighters would climb to intercept altitude, spot the P-51 escorts, and simply turn away. The Luftwaffe wasn't retreating, it was acknowledging mathematical reality. Mustang fever spread through German fighter units like a psychological contagion. Pilots reported a specific, paralyzing dread when silver fighters appeared at high altitude. Not fear of death. Veteran pilots had long since processed their mortality, but fear of irrelevance. The terror of watching your country burn beneath you while flying an aircraft physically incapable of stopping it. The voices of survivors carried a particular horror. Barr's diary entry from February 1945 recorded the despair with crystalline precision. We have become spectators at our nation's funeral. We climb, we see them, we watch them destroy what we were sworn to protect, and physics itself forbids us from intervening. An American P-51 pilot, Captain Robert Johnson of the 357th Fighter Group, described the tactical shift with eerie detachment. We didn't beat them in dogfights. We outran them to death. They'd come up to fight, we'd make one pass, and they'd watch us leave. You could see it break them, the moment they realized they were helpless. B-17 crews reported the change with stunned gratitude. Technical Sergeant Michael Romano, ball turret gunner, 91st Bomb Group. October 44, every mission was a meat grinder. November hits, and suddenly the Germans just stopped coming hard. They'd make one pass, half-hearted, then vanish. The P-51s didn't even have to chase them. The psychological dimension transcended physical casualties. The Luftwaffe wasn't being destroyed, it was being neutered, forced to witness its own impotence mission after mission. Desperate countermeasures emerged with the frantic energy of the doomed. In December 1944, FW-190DS received MW-50 methanol water injection systems, boosting emergency power to 2,100 horsepower for precisely 3 minutes before the engine began consuming itself. Top speed increased to 426 miles per hour, still 18 miles per hour slower than the P-51D, and the system caused engine failures in 40% of installations. The Ta-152H high-altitude interceptor, designed specifically to counter the Mustang threat, achieved 472 miles per hour at 41,000 feet using a pressurized cockpit and elongated wings. 43 were built before Germany's industrial capacity collapsed. Production facilities prioritized jet aircraft, Me-262s that could catch Mustangs but arrived too late and in numbers too few to matter. Tactical innovations proved equally futile. German pilots attempted lure tactics, feigning retreat to draw P-51s into energy-depleted traps. American pilots simply didn't chase. They orbited bomber formations, dove on any threat, then returned to station. The Luftwaffe shifted to mass assault doctrine in January 1945, throwing 100 fighters at formations to overwhelm the escorts through numerical saturation. The P-51s adapted by spreading into wider combat air patrols. using their speed advantage to concentrate against each attack element sequentially. No amount of tactical brilliance could overcome a 29-mile-per-hour deficit that gave the enemy total engagement control. The philosophical truth emerged slowly, reluctantly, like a fatal diagnosis. Speed hadn't decided who won the individual dogfight, it had decided who controlled whether dogfights occurred at all. The Americans had transformed air combat from a contest of maneuver and gunnery into a referendum on physics. The doctrine shift was profound, from win the fight to control the engagement. German defenders found themselves denied the fundamental ability to defend, watching their cities burn from aircraft that could simply refuse combat. Barr survived the war with 220 victories, Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, and the distinction of shooting down 16 P-51 Mustangs, more than any pilot in history. He lived to 77, long enough to understand the ultimate irony. The Luftwaffe had taught the world energy fighting, the boom and zoom tactics that defined air combat. The Americans had perfected it, then added the one thing German doctrine never imagined, the exit. In the end, the Luftwaffe didn't lose the sky to better fighters. They lost it to faster ones, 45 seconds at a time.